You know the great Shakespearean shout, cry God for Harry, England and St. George. But why St. George? How did we come to have this great devotion to a particular Roman saint? Well, the reason is medieval devotion. In the medieval period, people had a personal relationship with their saints. They felt that they were intervening in their daily life, day by day, as a regular occurrence. And if they were let down by their saint, if they prayed, they asked for the intercession of a saint, and the saint didn't oblige, they'd get quite cross. So people had treasured relics of saints. And if their prayers weren't answered, there are reports of them throwing them on the floor and stamping on them because they were cross, like a toddler with a saint who hadn't obliged. And St. George becomes the patron of England because he's seen, or was seen, to have delivered. Some people believe that William the Conqueror had the banner of St. George when he came over at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. But he was certainly thought to be present early in the Crusades, so at the Battle of Antioch in 1098 and at Jerusalem in 1099. St. George was there urging on and indeed rescuing the English or indeed the Norman forces. So the inspiration of the saints is crucially important, and the invocation carries on. So at Sluis in 1340, Crécy 1346, in Poitiers 1356, and famously Agincourt 1415. But even in the First World War, the troops thought at times, and this is 1914 to 1918, St. George was there helping them, aiding them, inspiring them, boosting morale. But it wasn't always going to be St. George. St. George wasn't the first patron saint of England. Before him, it was St. Edmund the Martyr, a 9th century East Anglian saint who was killed by the Vikings, and St. Edward the Confessor was a competitor for this important role. And it was really King Edward III who decided that it would be St. George because he established his chivalric order, the Order of the Garter, which even to this day, to this year, makes announcements of new appointments on St. George's Day, is still dedicated to St. George. The king is still head of the Knights of the Garter, and Edward III set that up as his chivalric order. Edward IV then set up his great chapel at Windsor to St. George, and really interestingly, when the Protestants came in and they got rid of the saints, they abolished the order of the saints, they kept St. George. So St. George remains this extraordinary figure in our national story, in our island story, but very much as an English saint. So who was he? Well, he's thought to have been martyred in about the year 300 under Diocletian, and his works were recorded in a very famous book, The Golden Legend, legend meaning story rather than fable, by Jacobus, jolly good name, Jacobus de Voragine, who was a medieval scholar. And he wrote, translated into English, which I thought you would prefer, what happened with St. George. So a city called Cyllene in Libya is terrorized by a dragon, which infests a vast lake and must be fed if it is to be kept at bay. Note the connection of the dragon with water. This is the essential water of life and of baptism. The dragon is the enemy of true faith. And at first the dragon is given sheep, but these run out. And the citizens resort to feeding it a man and a sheep. And then at the king's command, they start feeding it young people. And the lot falls upon the king's daughter. And the king tries to get out of this, but the people won't have it. And his daughter is sent to feed the dragon. But lo and behold, St. George rides by. He rescues the princess. And the maiden takes the dragon by her girdle into the city, where George slays it, refuses all honour, will not marry the daughter because he is a celibate, a holy man, and the city is saved, the dragon is slain, and they all live happily ever after. That was St. George, and you'll be glad to know, as with all good things, it's thought he went to Glastonbury in Somerset. So happy St. George's Day. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com, but I'm very pleased now to be joined by Gavin Ashenden, former chaplain to the late Queen and associate editor of the Catholic Herald. Gavin, thank you so much for joining me. I find the medieval devotion to saints very touching. They had an extraordinary depth and richness of belief.
think a lot of people don't understand the care that people take over finding a belief that works. People are much more pragmatic than we give them credit for. There's a terrible notion that the medieval years were years of superstition, but actually quite the opposite is true. If you look at the buildings, the art, the social care, the sense of community, they reached much far higher levels of sophistication than we're managing today. So it's something of a slander. But I think one of the things we need to give credit to our ancestors for is finding a way of living and loving and believing that worked and served them well. And there are so many things in medieval Catholic Christian England that one could be nostalgic for and look up for. And I think probably celebrating St. George's Day is one way of deepening that thirst.
And the saints very much brought God closer to man, didn't they? That people felt that there were these people who had lived, had done real things, and that they were a link between this world and the next world, between the divine and the human, the mortal.
Yes, the way the world works as we experience it, we all need patrons and influential friends who can add some leverage to our cause. And this is true in this sort of horizontal level of time and space. But the moment you have a sense of the reality of life and love and the spirit beyond time and space, one recognizes the same thing is true. Not because you want it to in some sort of Feuerbachian projection, but simply because when you practice that kind of praying, it appears to work. I remember meeting an early monk who influenced me on my journey from Protestantism to Catholicism, talking about life as a sort of an arena with those who are alive on the pitch, so to speak. But if you've ever tried playing a football match without an audience, without a crowd to support you, the thing really falls quite flat, and the crowd can sometimes turn the whole event one way rather than the other. And he was saying, look, when I die, do talk to me, do invoke me, do ask for my prayers, because I shall be part of the crowd of saints in heaven cheering you on, and you'll see the difference. And he's absolutely right. With both his prayers and some prayers of some other very special, holy, competent people, my life has been greatly helped.
And you make the very important point that they can be invoked. They don't actually do things. They can cheer on. They can cheer on if they appear, as St. George did at Antioch, but they can intercede, crucially. They are not mini-gods.
No, it's not magic. The interesting thing about magic is magic imitates faith. It's not the other way around. Again, this is one of the great misconceptions of the last secular century. But so it isn't about trying to somehow exercise a degree of control over events, which is what magic does. It's more about putting yourself in the right place with the right spirit, with the right help, the right inspiration, the right encouragement. I mean, these things are something of a mystery. You can't always describe them. It's very strange how practical things fall into place. They're meeting the right person at the right time in the right way. And this is all part of the life of the spirit that the Christian who prays becomes familiar with. And the saints are an enormously important additional element in that, both for encouragement and for somehow this rearrangement of things in a way that is more propitious.
And St. George, in the modern era, is a remembrance of that faith that we once had, but still a link to our Christian past.
Well, I think he's much more than that. I think that, in fact, I think he's quite to the secularists, to those who want to change culture. I think he's really quite dangerous because he reminds us of values that people are actually actively trying to get rid of. He reminds us that we need to belong to a nation rather than to some terrible, vague internationalism. In other words, to a family of peoples who are wedded to each other by heritage and by common history. He reminds us that one of the most valuable and effective periods in our national life was under Catholic Christianity, lasting for 1,300 years, when there was a depth and a quality to social, spiritual, and political relationships that we don't have at all. Essentially, what St. George reminds us is what we've lost and what we ought to try to recover.
Well, thank you very much, Gavin.